Imagine taking like the smartest artificial intelligence developer in Silicon Valley today, right?
Okay, I'm picturing it.
And you just drop them right into the middle of ancient Athens. And you tell them that their revolutionary new communication technology is actually going to completely destroy the human soul.
Wow, that is quite the claim.
Right. You tell them that their invention will give people this, illusion of being brilliant, but internally it's just going to hollow out their memory and their capacity for genuine truth.
I mean, that sounds exactly like a modern tech dystopia debate.
Exactly. But that is essentially exactly what Plato did 2,400 years ago. And, well, that is what we are unpacking today in this deep dive.
It really is the ultimate cautionary tale about media, memory, and, the pursuit of truth itself.
It's so fascinating.
Yeah.
Because we tend to look back at ancient classical philosophy as if it belongs in a sterile museum.
Yeah, like marble columns and guys in togas logically deducing premises in a vacuum.
Yes. But the reality is that these texts were forged in the middle of cultural chaos. I mean, technological upheaval, intense anxieties about the future of human cognition.
Totally. And to truly understand this, we have to escape the museum. We have to completely change our sensory environment.
So if you're listening to this, I want you to mentally walk with us out of the dense, noisy, politically vicious city walls of ancient Athens.
Set the scene for us.
Okay, so the year is roughly 410 BC. It is sweltering. The Peloponnesian War is just grinding the city down.
Oh man, so tension is high.
Very high. But you walk out of the gates and suddenly the noise of the marketplace fades. You find yourself walking along the delightfully cool banks of the Ilissus River.
That sounds amazing right now.
It's a total oasis. You find a rustic resting place under a lofty spreading plane tree. There is a gentle breeze. The Agnus castus shrub is in full blossom, throwing this incredible fragrance into the air.
Plato is so specific with these details.
He really is. And above everything, the air is just absolutely vibrating with the shrill, summer-like chorus of cicadas.
I love that. The sensory detail he provides in the text is intentionally overwhelming. It is the absolute definition of a sacred natural retreat.
And it's right here, in this profoundly earthy, incredibly beautiful setting, that one of the most vital conversations in human history takes place.
The dialogue we know as Plato's Phaedrus.
Yes. And our mission for this deep dive is to rigorously track the arguments made under that plane tree.
We're going to cover a lot of ground today.
We really are. We are going to explore the philosophical mechanics of the soul, the incredibly nuanced linguistic structures used to describe reality, and the profound theological collisions that happen when you place Plato next to the Hebrew and Christian scriptures.
It's a massive, sweeping journey.
But before we get to the theology, I'm just struck by the geography of it all. Because Socrates, famously, he never leaves the city center.
Right, he is a city boy through and through.
Exactly. At one point in the dialogue, his walking companion, Phaedrus, basically calls him a tourist.
Which is pretty funny.
He says Socrates acts like a stranger being led around by a guide. And Socrates replies that he's a lover of knowledge, and trees and country places don't teach him anything. Only the men in the city do.
He's all about human interaction.
Yeah, and he says Phaedrus only got him out of the city by waving a book in front of him, like a hungry cow led by a bow or a bunch of fruit.
That is such a great image. A hungry cow.
Right. So why does Plato physically move Socrates out of Athens for this specific conversation?
Well, that physical departure is a philosophical necessity. You mentioned the Peloponnesian War earlier.
Yeah, the city's just fallen apart.
Exactly. Athens is transitioning from this period of radical confident democracy into intense paranoid instability. And culturally, something massive is happening.
A paradigm shift.
A huge one. They are shifting from an oral, poetic tradition into a highly formalized culture of written literacy.
And that causes problems.
Massive problems. The civic and political spaces of Athens have become thoroughly corrupted by what we call the sophistic threat.
The sophists. I'd always thought of them as the ancient equivalent of high-priced PR spin doctors.
That is actually a very accurate comparison. These were professional intellectuals, men like Lysias, who actually wrote the speech that Phaedrus uses to lure Socrates out of the city.
The guy with the book, right.
Right. And the sophists charge astronomical fees to teach the art of persuasive rhetoric. But here is the critical danger. It was rhetoric entirely detached from objective truth.
Oh, wow. So just pure persuasion.
Yes, they taught how to win the argument, how to manipulate the jury, how to make the weaker argument appear the stronger.
I want to make sure I'm really tracking the real-world stakes of this, because in the Athenian democratic courts, they didn't have a district attorney or a public defender system like we do, right?
No, absolutely not.
So if your neighbor sued you, or if you were accused of a crime, you couldn't just hire a lawyer to stand up and speak for you. You had to stand before a jury of hundreds of your peers and speak for yourself.
Which is terrifying for most people.
Right. Your life, your property, whether or not you were exiled, it entirely depended on your personal ability to be persuasive in front of a crowd.
Exactly. And because most ordinary citizens were, well, they weren't gifted public speakers, a massive vulnerability opened up.
And the sophists swoop in.
They fill this gap through a practice called logography, professional speech writing.
Got it.
You would pay Lysias a small fortune. He would write a brilliantly persuasive speech tailored to your character. You would memorize it, and you would recite it in court to save your skin.
So it's like buying a legal defense that has absolutely nothing to do with whether you actually committed the crime.
None whatsoever. It's pure stylistic manipulation.
You have an entire culture being seduced by style over substance, by a probability over reality. Words are no longer tools for discovering the truth. They are weapons for acquiring power.
That is a perfect way to summarize the crisis.
So, returning to the setting, Socrates literally has to step outside the bounds of the corrupted city. The marketplace is just too noisy with lies. He needs the clarity of the riverbank to have a genuine spiritual reflection.
And that tension perfectly sets up the literary genius of the text. Because look at the character of Phaedrus himself.
Oh, Phaedrus. The ultimate fanboy.
Yes. He represents the archetypal, naive consumer of this sophisticated rhetoric. He's been spending all morning with Lysias, and he is absolutely captivated.
Hook, line, and sinker.
He's carrying a written copy of Lysias's speech, hidden under his cloak, clutching it like a treasure. He is so enamored by the rhythm, the vocabulary, the clever packaging, that he is completely blind to the philosophical poison inside it.
Let's talk about that poison, because Lysias' speech is structurally and morally bizarre.
It really is wild.
The argument Phaedrus is so excited about is this absurd paradox. Lysias argues that a young man should grant his romantic favors to a non-lover rather than a true lover.
Wait, let's make sure the listeners catch that. A non-lover.
Yeah. The reasoning is that the true lover is ruled by passion, gets jealous, causes public scandals, and eventually falls out of love and abandons you.
Which, sounds vaguely practical if you don't think about it too hard.
Right. But the non-lover, the guy who doesn't actually care about you, is rational, transactional, discreet, and won't cause any drama.
It is the ultimate reduction of human relationships to a utilitarian transaction.
Just a cold exchange.
Exactly. It strips all the divine madness, all the transcendence out of love, and turns it into a calculated exchange of bodily favors for social stability.
What's fascinating is how Socrates reacts to this absolute garbage speech. He doesn't immediately tear it apart.
No, he plays the long game.
He uses classic Socratic irony. Phaedrus finishes reading the speech, and Socrates feigns absolute submission to it. He gasps and says, "Oh, the effect on me was ravishing. I was in an ecstasy."
But he's totally mocking the kid.
Completely roasting him. He then proceeds to point out that Lysias just repeated himself over and over, throwing topics down haphazardly with no structural necessity.
Socrates is essentially critiquing the formatting of the essay.
Yeah, in fact, Socrates is so annoyed by the poor craftsmanship that he cutters his head in shame and delivers a better, more logically sound version of Lysias's terrible argument just to prove he can.
Right, Socrates defines love in that first speech as an irrational desire for pleasure that drags a person down toward excess. He beats Lysias at his own rhetorical game.
He out-sophists the sophist.
He does. But this is where the entire dialogue pivots. Socrates finishes his speech, gets up, and is about to cross the river to head back to the city. But he stops dead in his tracks.
The divine sign
Yeah.
has this familiar oracular sign, right? A voice that he claims only ever speaks to forbid him from doing something wrong.
And he realizes he has committed a terrible sin. He has blasphemed the majesty of love.
By portraying Erōs as something entirely selfish, evil, and destructive.
Yes, he has insulted a deity.
He says, "I must have a purgation." He needs to wash his mouth out, philosophically speaking.
A philosophical mouthwashing. I like that.
And this need to purify himself for speaking poorly of love leads directly to his palinode, his grand recantation. And this is where we get one of the absolute most famous, breathtaking allegories in all of Western philosophy.
The anatomy of the soul and the charioteer.
Yes. Let's get into it. To explain what true love actually is, Socrates says we must first understand the immortal nature of the soul.
He completely abandons the dry, logical proofs of his earlier speech and shifts into this soaring, mythic, poetic register.
It's beautiful. He likens the human soul to a composite power, a winged chariot. Let me try to break this down, and you tell me where I'm missing the nuance.
Go for it.
You have a winged chariot. It is guided by a charioteer, and it is pulled by two winged horses.
Okay, checking so far.
The charioteer represents human reason. He's the one holding the reins, trying to keep everything on the road.
The rational mind.
Right. And the first horse is the noble steed. It is white, stands upright, has clean limbs, and represents what the Greeks called thumos, spiritedness, honor, modesty, temperance.
A very well-behaved horse.
Exactly. This horse doesn't even need a whip. It listens to the spoken command of the charioteer. But then there is the ignoble steed, the dark horse.
And Plato's physical description of the dark horse is incredibly visceral.
It's super ugly, right?
Oh, it is lumbering, crooked, poorly put together. It has a short, thick neck, a flat face, dark skin, and bloodshot gray eyes.
Bloodshot eyes. Whack.
It is deaf and hardly yields to the whip or the spur. This horse represents epithumia, the sensual appetites, the base, unrestrained physical desires, insolence, and lust.
Now, I always struggle with this part of the design. If the dark horse is just base appetite that ruins everything, why did the gods even attach it to our chariot in the first place?
That is a brilliant question.
I mean, it seems like a fundamentally flawed design. Why not give the charioteer two white horses?
And that question cuts to the absolute heart of Platonic dualism. For Plato, human beings are inherently tragic, composite creatures.
Tragic creatures.
Yes, the gods do have two white horses. Their chariots are perfectly balanced. But human souls are a mixture of the divine and the chaotic.
So the dark horse isn't evil.
The dark horse isn't necessarily evil in its essence. It represents the heavy downward pull of our connection to the material world. It is the necessary engine of our physical existence, but it is utterly blind.
Like raw horsepower without a steering wheel.
Precisely. Without it, the chariot might not have the raw power to move, but left unchecked, it will violently drag the entire soul into the dirt.
Okay, that makes sense. The raw, chaotic power of materiality. Now, Socrates describes what these chariots were doing before we were born.
The pre-existence of the soul.
Right. He paints this picture of a heavenly journey. Before our souls were entombed in physical bodies, they were up in the dome of heaven, following the gods in a great cosmic procession.
Just cruising through the cosmos.
Yeah, and they would ride up to the highest vault of heaven and look out over what Plato calls the plane of truth.
And what they see there is crucial. They do not see beautiful things. They do not see just acts. They behold the forms.
The capital F forms.
Exactly. They see absolute justice, absolute temperance, absolute beauty, the eternal, unchanging essences of reality.
But then the tragedy strikes. Because of the unruliness of that dark horse, who is constantly violently pulling down toward the earth, the charioteers lose control.
Chaos ensues.
The chariots crash into each other. In the chaos, the souls lose their wings. They plummet from the heavens, drop to the earth, and are encased in physical bodies.
And Socrates outlines a strict hierarchy here based on the crash.
Really, like a class system.
A cosmic class system. Your status in this earthly life is directly determined by how much of that ultimate truth you managed to glimpse before your chariot crashed.
Oh, wow. So if you got a good look at the plane of truth.
Then the soul that saw the most truth is born into the body of a philosopher or a lover of beauty.
Convenient that Plato puts himself at the top.
Naturally. The soul that saw less becomes a righteous king or a warrior. Further down, you get craftsmen, farmers, and athletes.
And at the bottom.
At the very bottom, the souls that saw almost nothing become tyrants.
Which sets up this incredible philosophical concept of anamnesis. A-N-A-M-E-S-I-S.
Anamnesis, yes.
It usually gets translated as recollection. I've always thought of it as a kind of cosmic amnesia.
That's a great way to put it.
You know, you're walking around on Earth, totally forgetting who you are, where you came from, and the magnificent truths you used to stare at. And then one day, you see something physically beautiful.
Like a spark.
Yeah. A beautiful face, a piece of art, a stunning landscape, and it triggers something.
Exactly. For Plato, all learning, all spiritual awakening in this life is actually just remembering what your soul already knows.
So you aren't learning anything new?
Never. When a person sees physical beauty, it acts as a catalyst. It reminds the soul of the absolute beauty it once beheld in the company of the gods.
Socrates says that when this happens, the soul literally begins to flutter. He uses this incredibly intense, painful, throbbing language.
Very physical for a spiritual concept.
It is. The germ of the wing, which had dried up and closed over when you fell, begins to melt. It starts to sprout again. And that painful, exhilarating desire to regrow your wings and fly back up to the divine plane, that is what true love is.
The divine madness.
Yes. That is the divine madness that the sophists know absolutely nothing about.
It is arguably one of the most stunning poetic images of spiritual longing ever written. However, we have to look at the underlying mechanics of this system with a critical eye.
Okay, let's critique it.
Because this isn't just a romantic fairy tale about falling in love. It is a rigid philosophical system of self-salvation.
How so?
Think about how the soul actually gets back up. The charioteer has to engage in violent, exhausting combat with the dark horse.
Right, because the dark horse just wants the physical object.
Exactly. When the dark horse tries to lunge at the beautiful object to consume it physically, the charioteer has to yank back on the rein so hard that he covers the horse's jaws in blood, forcing the base desires into submission.
Wow, so it's a project of extreme self-elevation.
Precisely. It places the burden of salvation entirely on sheer intellectual and disciplinary effort.
So if you aren't smart enough, you're out of luck.
Right. If you aren't a high-born intellectual capable of doing this exhausting dialectical work, if you can't violently subjugate your own materiality, your soul remains grounded.
That is a heavy realization. It's an elitist ladder to heaven. And that provides the perfect transition for us.
Let's shift gears.
Because Plato isn't writing in a vacuum. How does this concept of the soul, of divine inspiration, and of ascending to truth compare to the surrounding ancient world?
It's fascinating when you map it out.
When we cross-examine this with ancient Near Eastern and Old Testament worldviews, the contrasts are jarring.
Let's start with his Greek context. Plato is heavily repurposing the epic language of Homer, the Iliad, and the Odyssey to describe the soul's ascent.
But he's doing it subversively, right?
Very subversively. He is taking the traditional poetic depictions of the gods, which were often petty and immoral, and elevating them to a pure philosophical plane. He's trying to reform Greek religion from within.
But the more fascinating structural parallel is with the Old Testament, specifically the first 9 chapters of the book of Proverbs.
The parallels there are incredible.
When you map the Phaedrus onto Proverbs, the similarities are mind-blowing. In Proverbs, you have the personification of Lady Wisdom.
Right, calling out in the streets.
Exactly. She is calling out in the public squares, offering life, truth, and spiritual elevation to anyone who will listen. Contrast her with the other primary figure in those chapters, the strange woman or the adulteress.
The seductive voice.
Yeah, her words are slick, flattering, and seductive, but they lead the naive young man straight down to the chambers of death.
The mapping is incredibly tight. Lady Wisdom parallels Socratic philosophical love, the pursuit of enduring truth that leads the soul upward.
And the strange woman.
The seductive strange woman perfectly mirrors Lacanic lust, the deceptive transactional rhetoric of the sophists that destroys the soul for temporary pleasure.
Both texts deeply recognize the danger of bad speech.
Yes, that seductive speech detached from objective truth, or, in the Hebrew context, detached from the fear of the Lord, is fundamentally destructive.
But here's where I start to see a divergence, because both traditions talk about being inspired by the divine. Socrates says that madness from the gods is the source of our greatest blessings.
He points to the priestesses at Delphi.
Right, uttering prophecies in ecstatic states. In the Old Testament, you also have prophets going into ecstatic states, like King Saul in 1 Samuel 10, when the Spirit rushes upon him and he prophesies with the prophets.
That very famous scene.
So are Plato and the Hebrew writers describing the exact same mechanism of inspiration?
They sound similar on the surface, but the underlying ontologies, their definitions of reality, are radically fundamentally opposed.
Break that down for us.
For Plato, this mania, this divine madness, is an internal awakening. The knowledge is already inside you. Inspiration is the soul looking inward and backward to recollect the pre-existent forms it already knows.
Right, the cosmic amnesia wearing off.
Exactly. But Old Testament prophecy is an external historical intrusion.
It comes from the outside.
Yes. It is the Ruach Yahweh, the Spirit of the Lord, rushing upon a human being from the outside. The prophet is not remembering a formless realm. The prophet is receiving objective historical commands from a personal creator God who is acting in real time.
That is such a vivid contrast.
Plato's inspiration unlocks an internal vault. Hebrew inspiration receives a broadcast from outside time and space.
That is a massive distinction. Unlocking a vault versus receiving a broadcast. And that stark difference in how the divine interacts with the human brings us to the core ontological tensions with the Hebrew scriptures.
We really have to look at the terminology of human existence itself here.
Let's talk about the uncreated soul versus the created life.
This is where the worldviews definitively clash, and we need to introduce the Greek term psyche.
Which means soul.
Right. For Plato, the psyche, which we translate as the soul, is self-moving. It is ungenerated.
What does ungenerated mean in this context?
It means it has always existed. It has no beginning, and therefore it has no end. It is naturally immortal. The physical body is just a temporary, unfortunate container that the psyche is currently trapped in.
Socrates literally calls the physical body a living tomb, which we carry about, imprisoned in the body, like an oyster in his shell.
Like an oyster. It's so dismissive of the body.
I always think of the Platonic view like software trapped in a faulty hardware unit. The software is perfect, eternal, and pristine. The hardware is glitchy, decaying meat. And the goal is to extract the software and throw away the hardware.
That is a fantastic analogy for Platonism. But the Hebrew worldview vehemently rejects the software-hardware split.
What's their term for it?
The Hebrew term for a living being is nephesh. It's pronounced ne-f-e-esh.
Ne-f-esh.
In the Old Testament, the nephesh is not an immortal spark of divinity trapped in a meat suit. A human being is a unified psychosomatic entity. You do not have a soul, you are a living soul.
So if Platonism is software and hardware, the Hebrew view is more like a woven tapestry.
Okay, I like that.
If you pull out the physical threads, you don't liberate the picture. You destroy the picture entirely. The picture and the threads are one thing.
Beautifully put. And because of that woven unity, human beings are not inherently immortal in the Hebrew view. We are entirely contingent.
Dependent on God.
Yes. Our existence, moment by moment, depends on God's life-giving breath. Furthermore, their ultimate destinations are completely different. In the Phaedrus, ultimate reality is a spaceless, colorless, formless realm beyond the heavens.
Accessible only by pure disembodied reason.
Exactly. Whereas the Old Testament counters this abstract dualism entirely.
The God of the Hebrews does not reveal himself as an abstract form in a formless void.
No, he reveals himself through physical creation.
He acts in literal dirt and history. He binds himself to covenanted geography, right? A burning bush in the Midianite wilderness, the physical rocky mountain of Sinai, the stone walls of Jerusalem.
Materiality is the primary theater of his revelation, not a barrier you have to escape.
To truly grasp the depth of this contrast, we have to do an independent analysis of a few specific Hebrew texts.
Let's start with the creation of humanity in Genesis 2.7.
I love this text. The imagery is so tactile. It says, God forms man from the dust of the ground. The Hebrew word for formed is yatzar, pronounced yatzar.
It's a very specific word.
It has the direct connotation of a potter working with wet clay. It's dirt under the fingernails imagery. God gets his hands dirty. He is in the mud.
There is no pre-existing soul floating around waiting to be born.
Exactly. And then into that mud, God breathes the breath of life. The nishmat chayim, pronounced nishmat kayim.
It is only when the physical body, formed from the dust, is combined with the divine breath that the creature becomes a living nephesh. Materiality is there from the very first moment of human identity.
And we fast forward to Proverbs 8.22 to 31. We see how the Hebrew writers viewed the structure of the universe itself.
This is the great passage on wisdom, or chokmah, pronounced kok, M-A-H.
Wisdom is personified here as being possessed by God at the very beginning of his work.
Yes, wisdom is described in verse 30 as the Aman, pronounced A-M-O-H-N.
Which means?
This translates to a master craftsman or an architect at God's side during the creation of the cosmos.
So what's the specific worldview clash here with Plato's plane of truth?
Well, in the Phaedrus, Plato suggests that the forms, absolute truth, justice, beauty, are an independent, transcendent matrix of reality that even the gods have to look up to.
The gods are beneath the forms.
Right. The gods draw their nourishment from the forms. They are subordinate to them. But Proverbs 8 affirms that chokmah, wisdom, is an attribute of the sovereign creator God himself. It is not an independent matrix above him.
That's a huge difference.
And more importantly, this wisdom is built into the fabric of the physical universe by his command. Therefore, the physical world is not a tomb.
Or sema in Greek.
Right. It's not a sema that impedes our vision. The material world is declared inherently good, structurally sound, and a source of deep joy.
That is a staggering paradigm shift. We move from the Platonic command to escape the physical, to find the truth, to the Hebrew declaration that truth is woven into the very fabric of the physical.
It changes everything about how you live your life.
And transitioning forward in the biblical canon, the New Testament takes this affirmation of the physical and pushes it to a radical, almost scandalous extreme.
This is where the Christian critique of Plato really sharpens its teeth.
And we have to start with the concept of love.
We've been discussing the Platonic concept of Erōs. Erōs is triggered by visible beauty. It is fundamentally an ascending, self-elevating desire.
I think of Erōs essentially as a ladder. It looks at someone or something beautiful, grabs hold, and uses that beautiful object as a rung to pull itself up to a higher spiritual level.
It's very utilitarian in a spiritual way.
It's acquisitive. It wants to take possession of the beautiful thing to achieve its own spiritual completion, to regrow its own wings. At its core, even when it aims for the highest philosophical ideals, it remains self-centered.
That's a very accurate diagnosis of Platonic Erōs. But the New Testament introduces a totally different word and concept to define ultimate love. Agape. Pronounced agapé.
Agape love.
If you look at the theology of Romans 5 or the poetry of 1 Corinthians 13, agape is the absolute inversion of the ladder of Erōs. Agape is a descending, unmerited, sacrificial love.
It doesn't look for a beautiful rung to climb on.
Exactly. It is initiated by God toward the unlovely, the sinner, the broken, the enemy.
It goes down instead of up.
It does not look at a beautiful object and desire to possess it for its own fulfillment. It looks at a broken, ugly object and sacrifices itself to bestow worth upon it. Erōs flies up to heaven by its own strenuous effort. Agape steps down into the dirt to heal.
Erōs flies up, agape steps down. That distinction ties directly into the next major critique regarding rhetoric and persuasion.
Let's go back to the text of the Phaedrus for a second.
Right. In the second half of the Phaedrus, after the charioteer myth, Socrates starts laying out the rules for the true orator. He calls him a physician of the soul.
He says true rhetoric is psychagogia, pronounced psychagogia.
Which translates to...
It literally translates to leading the soul. And Plato strongly believes that you lead a soul to truth through elite intellectual dialectic.
basically through super rigorous philosophical debate.
Yeah.
But look at how the Apostle Paul completely dismantles that in 1 Corinthians 1 and 2. Paul explicitly rejects the plausible words of wisdom. He rejects both the manipulative, crowd-pleasing persuasion of the sophists and the elite philosophical eloquence of the Platonists.
He throws both systems out.
Paul says he preaches the foolishness of the cross. He anchors salvation and the true leading of the soul, not in a sophisticated method of dialectical argument, but in a scandalous, brutal historical event.
Which brings us to what I think is the absolute linguistic and structural core of the New Testament's rebuttal to Plato.
Oh, this is the best part. We need to do a deep dive into the systemic functional linguistics, the discourse analysis of how the New Testament writers actually built their arguments.
Grab your grammatical hard hats, listeners.
Seriously, because this is where the language itself acts as a theological monument.
Let's look at the prologue of John's Gospel, specifically John 1:1 through 14. John introduces the logo, pronounced Logos.
The word.
This is the word, the reason, the divine principle of order that sustains the universe. Every Greek philosopher, including Plato, would deeply respect the concept of the logos.
They would be nodding along, reading the first few verses.
But then John writes what might be the most shocking, offensive phrase in ancient literature to a Greek ear. The word became flesh. Kai ho logos, sarx egeneto.
Let's pause right there. The logos became sarx, pronounced sarx. Sarx doesn't just mean a body, it means physical, bleeding, sweating, mortal meat.
It's a very visceral word.
To a Platonist who believes the body is a tomb to be escaped, the idea that the eternal logos would willingly become sarx is revolting. It is philosophical heresy.
It is the ultimate scandal.
But I want to do a deep dive right here on the Greek verbs using Campbell's aspectual application. Because John's grammar is doing heavy lifting.
The grammar is the theology here.
Exactly. Listen to the phrase again. Kai ho logos sarx egeneto. And the word flesh became... Let's contrast the present or imperfect aspect of Greek verbs with the specific aorist indicative used here. How does a Greek verb usually operate?
Well, the present and imperfect aspects in Greek are often used to describe ongoing, unfolding, or cyclical action. They depict an action in progress.
So if John used the imperfect...
If John had used an imperfect verb here, it might imply that the word was continually becoming flesh over and over, or that it was some kind of repeated mythological cycle.
Like a looping video. Or like the souls in Plato's myth continually cycling through 10,000 years of reincarnation, growing wings, falling back to Earth, trying to grow wings again. It's an endless, blurry cycle.
Exactly. But John doesn't use the imperfect. He uses agenado. This is an aorist indicative verb. And in systemic functional linguistics discourse analysis, the aorist verb represents perfective aspect with discourse remoteness.
Okay, before we lose anyone in the grammatical weeds, let's ground that. What does perfective aspect with discourse remoteness actually mean? If the imperfect is a looping video, what is the aorist?
Think of the aorist as a high-resolution photograph.
A photograph, okay.
It presents the action as a complete, whole-bounded event viewed from the outside. It is a singular, prominent point in time. The author isn't inviting you to watch the action unfold. He is placing a completed monument in front of you.
So by using the aorist agenado, John is building a structural monument in the text. He emphasizes the historical actuality and the singular prominence of the incarnation.
It happened. It is finished.
It is unrepeatable. It directly subverts Plato's ahistorical, cyclical, mythological frameworks. If we look at the meta-functions of the text, how the language itself constructs reality for the reader, this singular aorist verb grounds the ultimate truth not in an abstract realm of forms that we have to try and remember, but in an unrepeatable historical moment that we are simply called to witness.
The text is literally constructing a definitive, unshakable reality right before our eyes.
And this ties perfectly back to Paul in 1 Corinthians 2.
Yes. Paul says that true spiritual conviction relies on the demonstration of the Spirit. The pneuma, pronounced neumati-kohs. It's not about human arguments, it's about the Spirit's power.
This completely upends Plato's epistemology of anamnesis.
Completely. You don't attain truth by violently recollecting your soul's past life in the heavens. You receive truth through the illumination of the Holy Spirit in the present, grounded in the historical event of the Incarnation.
Zooming out from the grammar, we have to ask, how does the entire biblical narrative arc synthesize and respond to Plato's highest ideals?
We have this overarching canonical timeline.
Right. It starts with creation, where materiality is declared fundamentally good, and God's living speech structures the world.
Then we move to the fall,
Where human desires are perverted, and deceptive rhetoric, much like the serpents or the sophists, corrupts humanity.
Then we have redemption.
Where we receive the inscripturated word and the incarnate logos. And finally, we reach consummation.
And comparing the end goals, the final states of these two worldviews, is incredibly revealing.
Oh, the eschatology.
Yeah. Plato's ultimate goal for the philosopher is solitary, disembodied flight. The pure soul escapes the tomb of the body, escapes the earth, and stares eternally at abstract forms in a formless void all by itself.
It sounds incredibly lonely. But compare that to the biblical eschatology, the beatific vision in Revelation 22, when believers finally see God face to face.
The biblical vision is profoundly corporate and fully embodied. We don't escape the physical body. The body is resurrected, glorified, and made permanent.
It's not a void.
No. And we don't escape into a formless, spaceless void. The vision takes place in a restored physical cosmos, a new heaven and a new earth, specifically within the architecture of the New Jerusalem. It is a highly social, intensely material, embodied eternity.
I also think we can't ignore how the Old Testament prophet Jeremiah subverts Plato's deep anxiety over the written word.
We haven't fully touched on Plato's critique of writing yet.
We're going to dive deep into that in a moment. But essentially, Plato hates writing because it's an external, dead thing. But Jeremiah 31 solves this.
The promise of the new covenant.
Exactly. The promise is that God will put his law within them, and he will write it directly on their hearts via the Holy Spirit.
The biblical solution to the limitation of an external text isn't to abandon writing for oral philosophy like Socrates wanted to.
It's the internal transformation of the reader by the Spirit.
Which leads us naturally to how the early church fathers handled all of this, because these brilliant early Christian thinkers had a delicate task.
They couldn't just ignore Plato.
No, they recognized the Phaedrus as an absolute intellectual apex of pagan philosophy. They had to figure out how to utilize Plato's brilliant, if flawed, framework without absorbing his toxic theology.
And they had very different strategies for doing that. Let's talk about Justin Martyr. He developed this concept called logos spermaticos.
The seed of the word.
Right. He argued that Plato caught genuine glimpses of the truth because he participated in the seed of the logos prior to Christ's incarnation. It's a very generous approach. It's basically saying Plato was onto something real, but he only had a fragment of the light, whereas Christ is the full sun.
Then you had Origen of Alexandria.
Origen went a little too
He
far.
really did.
Yeah.
He was deeply enamored with Plato. He heavily borrowed the chariot imagery and the concept of the pre-existence of souls to try and explain the fall of rational spirits before the creation of the material world.
He leaned too far into the Greek ontology.
And this move was later definitively condemned by the church because it severely compromised the biblical doctrine of a good material creation from nothing.
But my absolute favorite strategy comes from Augustine of Hippo. I love this concept. Explain his Egyptian gold strategy.
Augustine is fascinating because he was a master rhetorician himself before his conversion. He knew exactly how seductive the sophists could be.
He used to be one of them.
Basically, yeah. He argued that just as the Israelites took the gold of the Egyptians when they fled out of slavery, Christians should plunder the Egyptian gold of Platonic rhetoric.
Take the good stuff.
Yes. He believed the church should take Plato's brilliant understanding of psychagogia, the leading of the soul, and retool it strictly for Christian preaching and biblical exegesis.
His argument was essentially, use the sharpest intellectual tools available to build the kingdom of God.
But simultaneously and fiercely reject the pagan premises underlying them, like the uncreated soul or metempsychosis, which is the doctrine of reincarnation. Plunder the gold, but leave the idols behind.
Take the rhetorical brilliance, leave the reincarnation. I love that. But, we don't just read the Phaedrus today as some dusty, ancient theological artifact.
Not at all.
Its warnings about speech, writing, and technology are staggeringly, almost uncomfortably relevant right now. Which brings us to the climax of the dialogue's second half, the profound cultural relevance of the myth of Thuth and Thamus.
This is where the ancient text suddenly sounds like a critique of Silicon Valley.
It really does set up the myth for us.
Socrates concludes his argument on true rhetoric by telling an old Egyptian tale. The god Thuth, who is credited with inventing numbers, geometry, astronomy, and most importantly, letters, goes to King Thamus of Egypt.
And Thuth is incredibly proud of his invention of writing.
He pitches it to the king like a tech CEO pitching a new app. He says this invention will make the Egyptians wiser and give them better memories. It is a specific both for the memory and for the wit.
He promises it will upgrade human cognition. But King Thamus completely shuts him down.
He does not buy it.
Thamus counters that writing will actually produce the exact opposite effect. It will produce forgetfulness in the souls of learners, because they will begin to rely on external marks rather than internal recollection.
They'll trust the written document instead of engaging their own minds.
Let me read the exact quote, because it gives me chills. Thamus says, "You give your disciples not truth, but only the semblance of truth. They will be hearers of many things and will have learned nothing. They will appear to be omniscient and will generally know nothing. They will be tiresome company, having the show of wisdom without the reality."
It is a devastating critique of outsourced knowledge. Socrates goes on to say that writing is like a painting. It looks alive, it looks like it has intelligence, but if you ask it a question, it preserves a solemn silence.
It can't defend itself.
Right, it can't adapt to its audience, it just rigidly repeats the same thing. The living word, however, is graven in the soul of the learner through interactive living communal dialogue.
Okay, listener, I want you to apply this directly to the 21st century. Isn't this the exact, precise critique of digital media, social media algorithms, and artificial intelligence?
It is remarkably, terrifyingly prophetic.
We carry these incredibly powerful devices in our pockets. We have access to the sum total of human knowledge at a keystroke. But what is it doing to our souls?
Let's deeply explore this modern critique. What happens when we have an infinite abundance of external information? Google, ChatGPT, endless algorithmic feeds.
According to Thamus and Socrates, this abundance of external data causes a deep structural internal forgetfulness.
We outsource our memory to the cloud. We don't learn, we just search, we don't retain, we just bookmark.
And we get infected with the illusion of wisdom. Because we have access to all the facts in the world, we feel incredibly smart, we feel omniscient. But we lack deep internal memory. We lack the capacity for slow, contemplative thought.
We just parrot whatever the algorithm fed us in a 10-second video.
We become exactly what Thamus predicted. Tiresome company. People who know random facts but possess no actual integrated wisdom.
Exactly. And think about AI chatbots in this context. They are designed to perfectly mimic living dialogue. But ultimately, they are the pinnacle of the dead, written word that Socrates warned about.
They are a statistical semblance of truth.
When you probe them for moral depth, for living conviction, or for genuine empathy, They remain, in a spiritual sense, solemnly silent.
They are predicting the next word. They are not leading your soul.
They cannot engage in true psychagogia. They cannot lead a soul to the good because they have no soul. The medium trains us to consume information passively rather than doing the hard, communal, sweaty work of dialectical truth-seeking.
That is heavy. So how then does the Christian worldview offer a final integrated response to both the ancient philosophers sitting by the river and the modern tech-weary citizens staring at their phone?
The Christian response must synthesize these critiques and offer a living, breathing alternative. First, against the disembodied isolation of modern digital communication and against Plato's anxiety over the dead written text, we must fiercely commit to incarnational community.
Draw the line for us from Socratic dialogue to the local church. How does that answer the problem?
Well, Socrates preferred living face-to-face discourse because it was dynamic and adaptable. The Christian worldview fulfills this desire perfectly, but pushes it further.
Yes.
The Word of God is not meant to be just an isolated text read silently on a screen in your bedroom. It is meant to be lived out, preached, wrestled with, and physically consumed in community.
That makes total sense.
This happens tangibly through the sacraments: communion, baptism. The Word is made visible, it has a taste, it has weight. We are bound together in physical reality, checking each other, guiding each other, embodying the truth together.
It solves the problem of the dead text by ensuring the text creates a living, breathing body of people.
But here's the ultimate contrast, the most profound subversion of Plato in the entire text.
Let's bring this deep dive to its crescendo. We have to talk about the elitism of the Phaedrus.
If you look closely at the mechanics of the Phaedrus, Plato's vision is fundamentally, inescapably aristocratic.
Very exclusive.
Who can actually control the dark horse of appetite? Who has the intellect, the aristocratic pedigree, and the sheer leisure time to master philosophical dialectic and violently pull their chariot up to the celestial plane?
Only a select few. The elite philosophical natures.
Everyone else, the farmers, the merchants, the ordinary people struggling to survive, they are doomed to be reincarnated further down the ladder. It's an exclusive club of self-elevating intellectuals.
But the gospel absolutely shatters this.
It shatters it completely. The Christian response stands on the radical, down-to-earth democracy of the gospel.
God's grace is not reserved for an intellectual elite who can parse philosophical arguments or afford the leisure time to debate by a river.
The Apostle Paul writes that God specifically chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. He chose the weak things to shame the strong.
Salvation is available to all people, the uneducated, the poor, the broken, the marginalized. Through faith alone, not through an exhausting intellectual ascent.
It's the contrast of ascending versus descending. Plato demands a self-elevating, strenuous, exhausting chariot ascent that the vast majority of us will simply fail. We will crash.
But Christianity offers the descending, sacrificial agape love of the incarnate Word.
Christ comes down into the mud, into the physical brokenness of the earth, to rescue the soul that cannot fly.
He doesn't stand at the top of the celestial plane and say, subjugate your dark horse, grow your wings, and meet me up here. He comes to the absolute bottom to carry us home.
That is the ultimate beauty. Plato's highest aspiration, the soul united perfectly with eternal truth, is fulfilled not by strenuous human striving, but by radical divine condescension.
What an incredible intellectual and spiritual journey. From the cicadas on the banks of the Ilissus River, through the mechanics of the human soul, all the way to the heart of the gospel.
It really is a masterclass in worldview analysis.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, our listener, with a final, lingering, provocative thought to mull over on your own.
The final takeaway.
We've talked about the manipulative sophists of ancient Athens and the hyper-persuasive algorithms of Silicon Valley. They are essentially the exact same threat.
The parallel is undeniable.
If our modern digital algorithms and AI systems are the new professors of rhetoric, aiming entirely for probability, engagement, and persuasion over actual truth, how do you actively cultivate the beauty in the inward soul that Socrates prayed for right before he left that riverbank?
It really is the defining question of our age. In a world completely saturated with noise, algorithmic manipulation, and the illusion of wisdom, how do we anchor ourselves in the true, the good, and the beautiful?
I think it might just start with putting the screen down, stepping outside the walls of our noisy digital cities, finding a quiet place, and choosing the messy, beautiful reality of the living word over the dead text. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.